Thank you, guys. And thank you, Dan and Cynthia, for inviting me to this. This is awesome, so thank you, guys. So my name is Dominic Steil. I'm the CTO of dApps Inc., and we are an enterprise blockchain computing company. So we're creating what we think is the market for an EBC, if you will. And you can follow me on Twitter at DomSteil, on my website or blog if you guys want to see any Bitcoin or blockchain articles at domsteil.com. So I'm one of the Bitcoin believers, blockchain believers for a while. I got into Bitcoin and blockchain by mining actually in college, and so that's kind of a few years back how I got into the space, and I've seen it go from the crypto and now into the enterprise side of enterprise blockchain and the different protocols that are emerging. And so at the same time, I was doing a lot of development on the Salesforce platform, and that was kind of the combination of those two things, enterprise blockchain, enterprise software, and so that's how we founded the company. And our thesis is that this is the next generation of computing, and the things that are happening today on decentralized networks are going to set the future for the next 10, 20 years of technology. And so what I'll be showing today is a protocol called Etherium and also one called Hyperledger that we are building applications for, enterprise blockchain applications for. And again, our thesis is that the things that are happening today on blockchain networks were either not possible before, such as things like NFTs or non-fungible tokens that are being created on the Ethereum network, things like digital asset transfers, and even distributed systems, maybe possibly before. We'll see today in the Hyperledger demo how we can have a logically centralized but organizationally decentralized network. And so what we've focused on over the last year and a half was we were at first trying to, what is the killer app for blockchain in the enterprise and on Salesforce? And we couldn't really figure it out. It was too early. We didn't have any of the customer meetings. We didn't really know what was going to have a huge impact. So what we did instead was we built an application suite. So we built a way that developers can quickly build Ethereum applications or Hyperledger applications on Salesforce. And the reason being is, a lot of the times it's command line tools. You have to open up multiple terminals to run Docker containers. You have to run, Vim and all these different things, or you have to download the entire Ethereum blockchain to your computer, which is the large one over 1 terabyte now. So, or the full archive node. So it's all of these kind of problems where if you're an application developer, we wanted to streamline all of that. We wanted to make it as easy for a Salesforce developer or company to start building enterprise blockchain applications. And so that's what led to our first product, which was the dApp suite for Ethereum. But what we see as over the next couple of years is there's going to be a number of emerging blockchain technology protocols that are going to have different use cases. They're going to have different different values, different models, different consensus mechanisms. And what we want to do is provide the application and the integrations to these different protocols. So starting on the left, we've done Ethereum, we've worked on Hyperledger, and by Dreamforce we want to have one for R3 Corda, and things like IPFS in the future, Chain, and so in time, ideally we would have a application or a managed package for all of these different enterprise blockchain protocols that developers could build on, that companies could say, we have this use case in mind, maybe is this a Corda use case or is this a Hyperledger use case, and we can go in and try to solve the business problem instead of being invested in saying, we only do Hyperledger by Hyperledger, we only do Ethereum and we own a bunch of Ethereum, but do an Ethereum project. So we take this multi-protocol approach to focus on the customer and focus on knowing that not all blockchains are the same and they have different purposes and over time are going to mature, and we really think it's still early TCP/IP stage, so we're not really sure which one of these protocols, or if it's not even on here, will emerge as the enterprise blockchain protocol. And so with that, the first one over the last year and a half was Ethereum, to really take the entire market share, and especially from an enterprise standpoint as well. And so that's what we wanted to focus on, was let's build an Ethereum client for the Salesforce platform. Let's build an SDK and also provide a node for developers to be able to build on the Ethereum protocol. And so that was our first product, and I'll show a demo of that today. The second one is dAppscape, and this is for Hyperledger. And this is more of a enterprise business network than a tokenized Ethereum network, or one where there's a native token that's required in order to use and actually make state changes on the network. Hyperledger Fabric, we see there's a ton of potential applications for Salesforce, and the one that we showed today was for CRM. So just core CRM, accounts, contacts, and leads, writing to a Hyperledger network where it's owned by multiple entities. And in a way, it's actually a way you can connect basically a view for multiple orgs by writing to a one shared ledger. So we'll see that today in the demo as well. This is the kind of the stack that we're using. And then in addition, I was going to show a Cpq demo today, but we showed this at Dreamforce last year, and this is kind of an idea of some of the things that we're doing. We make call outs on things like an order was activated in Cpq, and we get order line items or order products from the Cpq engine, writing those to a distributed ledger, in this case Hyperledger Fabric, and then we can start to do cool things like make platform events to all the different companies that want to have updates on that particular order. We also will surface things like the shipment status on an external object, so multiple entities, different Salesforce orgs, different companies, or even internal business units can have a view into the ledger and the entire history of what happened with the shipment, or if there was a telematic reading that caused the shipment to have a status change. All of that can be recorded on the blockchain, and using things like invocable methods, process builder, external objects, platform events, we want to combine the best of the Salesforce platform with the innovations that are happening in the cryptocurrency and blockchain space. And that's a core thing of what we do when we build products and integrations. So after the demo, if you guys like to understand more, we get links to managed package, connect to dapsinc.com is our email. We're also hiring engineers as well. If you guys like to get connected, definitely reach out. But for now, we're going to jump into two different demos. The first one being the Ethereum demo, and then the second one will be our Hyperledger demo. All right. One sec while this gets going. One second here.
Cable can be a little picky.
Yeah.
It went into your laptop all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably
There we go. Okay. So the first product, like I said, we built was dApp Suite, and this is really, it's an SDK for Salesforce developers to build Ethereum applications. And we built this for developers. We built this for companies and SI partners that want to start building Ethereum applications. And it's very easy to get going. You get it, go to the App Exchange, get it now. You can install a managed package. The only configuration is you click configure, and it basically brings you to an OAuth, and that creates a connected app. And that's pretty much that's the only setup you guys have. The nodes are running, the API is already set, so you can start building right away.
Dominic, could you zoom in and see if that helps a little?
Yeah. So there's, on the configure, basically that's the only setup is configure, and then that will bring you to an OAuth page where you give access for the connected app. And so for the Ethereum demo, the first thing I want to show is actually creating a new account. So in Ethereum, you need to create accounts, and so we provide a way for you to create accounts on top of the platform. So we can see here we have an account name, we have an Ethereum password. Let's see, domicile. Zoom in more. There we go.
A lot more.
Okay, a lot more. All right, so this is.
Turn the lights off. I can't see you.
Okay, we can turn some more on.
Way better.
There we go. Sure.
Keep it.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So we can see here, this is an Ethereum account allows you to make state changes on the network. So gas or Ether, the native token, is needed to deploy contracts, call contracts, make state changes on the network. So what we do is we allow you to essentially create Ethereum accounts on the platform. It's always hard to type in a demo. Let's see here. Okay, and so we can create our account, and then we'll see DOM style SF account created. We can search for our account, and we also could import or export accounts. So if you did want to export this to like my crypto or my Ether wallet, you could essentially export the JSON file of this wallet. So this is similar to like my crypto or my Ether wallet if you're familiar with that. We also can import wallets from offline. So if you do have a wallet, you can import it as well into the platform. And so one thing that we wanted to do is provide a way that we could forward Ether. So there's kind of a problem where if you have an Ether wallet, you create a new Ether wallet and you want to start using it, you actually have to forward Ether to it first. So what we created is a gas service, essentially, where we'll forward you 10 testnet Ether. And so this is all, maybe I didn't mention this, but all of these to start when you download the managed packages for the testnet. So you're not actually having to spend real Ether to deploy anything. So this is testnet Ether. We deploy to a Robson testnet, so you can just start developing whatever smart contract you would like. So we can go to DOM style demo account, and then we'll see here in the bottom right corner, I just created this account and we forwarded 10 Ether to this particular account so that I could start deploying on the platform. The next thing we'll look at is we have a Solidity Compiler. So this might be hard to see, but essentially what this provides is an interface or IDE similar to if you've seen Remix and you've done development in the browser for Remix. This is an IDE so you can write smart contracts inside of the Lightning platform. We'll also be able to import contracts as well. So I can go ahead and import, let's just say this is going to be a network token. So I'll do, this is our smart contract. And essentially we're writing Solidity code inside of the platform, and we'll actually compile this into a smart contract that we will deploy to the network. So what type of network token do we want to create? Do SF meetup token? We can do SF meetup token. Okay, and so then what we can do is we can go down to the compiler version. We will compile the contract, and what this does is it does two things. It saves the code and the bytecode, which gets sent to the Ethereum virtual machine, and that's essentially your contract. And it also saves the ABI, and the ABI is essentially a JSON structure that is essentially providing what are the functions in the state in the calls that you need in this contract. So what we do with that ABI is we're going to be saving this entire thing, the ABI, the bytecode, the contract code, to a smart contract library inside of Salesforce. This library is important because this is what you're actually able to use to deploy contracts to the Ethereum network. So we can see that we can see library by language, we can see the bytecode and the contract code has been saved. And this is important when we go to what we call our smart contract interface. And so the smart contract interface is actually doing a lookup to what contracts do we have in the library. So I can go to see we have our SF meetup token, and an interface will be dynamically generated based on the contract that we created. And so what this does is, it saves you time. You don't have to custom code a Visualforce page every single time you want to start deploying contracts. In addition to, if you wanted to do like an approval process before this contract was able to be deployed, you could do that as well using like standard approvals. And so what we'll do here is we'll show an initial supply. So let's just say this is initial supply of, I think it's like 10 billion. We'll do SF meetup token is the token name, decimal units, T, and then the version of the code as well. And we will create this contract. And what this is going to do is it's looking up to what accounts do we have. And so the account that I created earlier, DOM style demo account SF, we can now use to deploy this contract to the network. So at this point, we're deploying the contract to the network. And this is going to take a few seconds because we're essentially calling the Ethereum virtual machine, and then we get a response back with the data such as, we're essentially writing to Ethereum, and then once it responds back that this has been written to the blockchain, we'll get all the other functions that are associated with this contract, like send and transfer, call, a balance of a token holder or an address for this contract. In addition, we will persist all of the data, and what we're looking at essentially is like, it's kind of the balance between if you want to have the data in an external system versus actually writing the data to Salesforce. And so in some instances, it makes sense that we'll write the data back or also we can check and see like the actual token data we'll write back in some instances. In other instances, it makes more sense. We just have an external data source and we're surfacing the data in an external object. So what we'll see here is we're persisting the data. We can see this is the token we just created. We have the contract address. We have it a type is ERC20. I think this is, well, it gives an idea of like as more of the ERC20 type standards in the Ethereum ecosystem and community are being created, we can just drop those into the platform and start to test like what is an enterprise version of like the CryptoKitties smart contract look like and what type of problems could that solve. So that's the type of platform we wanted to create where you can basically drop in any smart contract code as these different standards are emerging over the next couple of years and see what you can do with the platform. And in addition to this, we can also start to like transfer this token as well. So this is the SF meetup token. We can look up this SF meetup token and say what address do we want to transfer this to. I will actually going to connect to an address that we have in MetaMask if we want to connect to it. If not, I have some other addresses in here. Let's see, I'll go to Virgin Atlantic. Essentially what we're able to do is do point issuances and token transfers on the platform. So we can take, for example, Alice Williams. She is one of our accounts. We'll go and take her address instead of pulling it from MetaMask. And what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and send her let's say 100,000 of the SF meetup tokens. I'll go back to my account and we'll go and enter in our Ethereum password as well. And so we can start to send tokens on the platform as well. So this could be interesting with other types of digital assets. Again, this is just for an ERC20, but if we go back to we can do a few things. We can first go back to the SF meetup token and see that we've transferred essentially 10,000 to Alice. And so this should update on our chart here. We have our point issuance by account name. We can now see she was transferred 100,000 of the SF meetup token. We also record the token transfer. So data such as like when did the age of the transaction, when did the transaction take place, the contract address, the transaction hash, what block height did this transaction occur. So we're allowing you to manage essentially all of the token transfers. And then you can also do things like if we wanted to actually call what is the balance, or like ask the blockchain essentially a question, what is the balance of Alice's SF meetup token? So we can call the contract. And we'll see that this down here, the 100,000 that we just asked. So if anyone called this and said, and basically said, what is the balance of Alice's, her Ethereum address, we could see that SF meetup token is essentially responding, or the smart contract's responding with she has 100,000 of that token. Because we're persisting all of the data, we can do things like, this is one we did a while back, was like airline loyalty points. And we can start to leverage things like dashboards and reporting that if you were to do this off a platform like Salesforce, you have to import a bunch of libraries or do another type of call out. So what we're seeing here is point issuance over time for any sort of token transfer. If you're like a customer service rep, you could use this as well to essentially transfer tokens to customers. We can see point issuance in your top customers by token transfers as well. So we can see different accounts. And so, again, what I wanted to show is really this is a developer's environment for testing and deploying different Ethereum applications on top of Salesforce. We're persisting so you can manage all the data, such as if we go to the SF meetup token, we'll be able to see all of the transactions that have occurred. We'll be able to see the tokens that have been created. And then you can also see external transactions is something else that we're working on, which is any transaction that happens outside of Salesforce as a client will also be recorded here as well. So we're not saying, you pretty much use this as a client, and then if someone wanted to call it from an Ethereum mobile wallet, they could also do that as well, and you would see the transaction show up here. So it's a way to manage the entire, basically the entire smart contract and the token, or whatever type of application you create. So with that, I'm going to now switch gears to the Hyperledger demo. And so I'd say Hyperledger is really kind of a completely different side of I would say different side of the brain on working with this, and it's a much different way that Hyperledger Fabric and Composer goes about building out blockchain networks, and the way they actually design them. You have to build pretty much everything from the ground up. You have to build out the nodes, you have to build explorers, you have to write APIs. If you want an application layer, there's different ways you can generate it. But with Hyperledger, there's no native token. And so what they like to model it as is participants, assets, and transactions. So you have a set of participants with assets transferring between them, and then you have transaction logic. It's not so much a contract-oriented blockchain like the Ethereum network is. They have a concept called chain code, which essentially is their version of smart contracts, but they abstract that using something called Composer, which is what we use as well. And so what I'm going to show right now is, this is just an example of a Hyperledger application on Salesforce. And what we'll see here is these are what we're just calling blockchain accounts. So we wanted to start with what's a core CRM use case that we can demonstrate a Hyperledger Fabric Composer integration and have essentially a network history of the entire business network. And so what we'll see here is I'm logged in right now as one user. So this is the Einstein org. And then I have another user in here. This will be my test, I think it was Tesla org. And so what we'll be able to see if we go into this org, and we'll create a new account. We'll just call this SF Meetup as the new account. And we'll say this is a prospect, and we'll say it's biotechnology, it's fine. And just put in a number, and we'll save this. And what we'll be able to do is we can go back into our other org and see that we are writing to this ledger. And so we'll be able to see here's our SF Meetup and our biotechnology account. And so what we're doing is we're essentially virtualizing the data on the blockchain and the rights to the blockchain inside of multiple orgs. And so again, this is just, we're starting with accounts, contacts, and leads. And in a sense, this is essentially a CRM network that you could essentially use this as a CRM network with internal business units. There was a customer we've talked to that they grew from acquisition, and they have a problem where they have all these different Salesforce instances and different Excel sheets, and they were just thinking about using something similar where they could essentially virtualize the most up-to-date data and have a ledger essentially of the most up-to-date transactions, in addition to the most up-to-date set of growth critical assets such as CRM data. So I'm going to jump into this other org really quick to show the dashboard that we're capturing because of this. So it's going to be dApps Fabric. And so again, the data itself lives on blockchain and on the Hyperledger blockchain. And in addition to this, we like to consider it as logically centralized but organizationally decentralized among multiple entities. And so this is, we think, is one of the main differentiators of being able to write to a distributed ledger. And so we can see, again, this is I'll zoom in. So this is a dashboard. We can see very similar, blockchain accounts by industries, transactions by type. If we refresh the screen, we'll be able to see in the blockchain transactions at the bottom, we added a new asset. So this asset just came in for the new account that we created. We're also keeping track of the network users. So when we add a new network user, when someone installs the managed package, they create a new user. There's a checkbox that says add CRM participant to, or add to CRM participant network, to the CRM network. And so we can keep track of who has access to this ledger, who's writing to this ledger. And we also can see the network users by organization. So we think this is powerful for a number of, could be for any industry, this could be for any sector, but we wanted to start with the core CRM use case to demonstrate essentially an integration between Salesforce, writing to a blockchain, surfacing the data, and then in addition to this, we're also doing things with platform events to actually writing to Salesforce as well. So we can look at something like this. This is kind of the use case I was talking about earlier with Cpq. And in this instance, what we're doing is we're publishing an event ID from the blockchain, and this is writing back to the org. So we can see, for example, a shipment status that's associated with an event ID, or a centigrade, a Celsius reading. So if we had something like a Samsara API giving us like centigrade readings or light readings, we could essentially tie that to a blockchain event ID and a shipment status, a shipment that's come from Cpq, and essentially those are the two mechanisms that we're using. We're using Hyperledgers for an external object data source, and we're also using Hyperledger's events to write back to multiple orgs, or if any other console or application that you'd like to use. We surface it in communities as well. Lastly, so I want to talk about some of the use cases that we're hearing in stories that we're hearing from customers. A lot of it's around the idea of contracts. One of them's in the oil and gas industry for performance-based contracts with their suppliers. We're working on essentially building a ledger between the or the upstream company and their suppliers so that they have visibility into all of the telematics coming from the rigs on site. So there's no subjectivity when a payment goes out to their suppliers, whether it was 4.5 days or 5 days. And so that's one of the applications of using Hyperledger, connecting it. They would use Salesforce for all the dashboards for telematics and for the actual events. And those two entities are both on Salesforce, would have a logically centralized but organizationally decentralized view into how long it took them to get the oil out of the ground and when they were done with the job, so there's no subjectivity between them and the supplier. We're also doing a POC with a company in financial services, and they want to do usage-based contracts, usage-based financing for a dealer network and equipment leasing. And they want to use a very similar like IoT and shared ledger application network where there's essentially an automation based on the usage data coming from the equipment. Currently, they can't do that type of like flex leasing because of the manual processes, the manual contracts that it takes to change that monthly payment on the equipment asset. And so by leveraging a shared ledger where they can say, this is the usage on the equipment that we had this month, here's the data as it's written to a ledger that we share, they can automate and streamline, and also similar to the oil industry, reduce costs associated with those disparate systems. And so I want to leave you guys with these are the two applications, or the two application suites or protocols that we're currently working on. We also have, by Dreamforce, we want to work with R3 Corda, as it's a completely separate protocol. Again, a third protocol that has a lot of advantages, completely different architecture, and we think that we could build something, and we're working with their team at R3 to basically build a application layer for R3 Corda and integration to Salesforce as well. So that's our vision, is bringing all these different protocols to the enterprise companies and customers and developers of Salesforce platform. So that's it. Thank you guys.
For some questions?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, we got 15 minutes or so for questions. Grab the mic. We don't need to all. We can just hang out.
There you go.
Any questions in the back?
Yeah.
Firstly, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
We are trying to accomplish something very similar. So I have a bunch of questions for you, if you don't mind.
There's only 15 minutes.
I know there's only 15 minutes, but it would be all of them are interesting. First of all, why would we need a separate SDK when we already have SDKs? example. For example, in my current use case, I'm trying to make a payment from A to B. I'm using a Hyperledger Composer.
Okay.
I can even use EVM. Okay, that's not good for protocols. But when I talk about an SDK, the whole concept of a Hyperledger fabric is to get out of this custom UI, is to make the chain code more approachable to people.
All right.
Right? If we are trying to bring in a new UI and trying to override an existing open source SDK,
We're using that.
yeah, you're using that SDK essentially and developing a layer on that.
Right. That's exactly what we're
So,
doing.
are we trying to solve a problem here, or are we just trying to complicate?
No, we're building application layers and integrations to build to the exact same APIs that you're talking about, Fabric, Composer. And so the way that you can build those network models using the schema language they have, the JavaScript abstraction layer, all we're doing is building integration between Salesforce to those models. So you can spin up like the Angular, the UMN app, you can do the Ionic app they just came out with. So this would integrate exactly with those other apps.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand, so what is the primary purpose of the apps to come into this space and use Salesforce over React, over Angular, to prove it? And for me, I don't want my chain information, like Hyperledger information, like all the dashboards which I'm seeing.
Yeah.
I don't want my complete dashboard information in Salesforce.
It's not in Salesforce though. It lives on the blockchain and we're just virtualizing the data inside of Salesforce.
With API call.
Right. So we,
Perfect.
yeah.
So what is the purpose of the apps in to choose Salesforce over any other front-end tool?
Because Salesforce is the fastest growing enterprise platform. It has things like AI baked into it, the reports and dashboards we're seeing, all of the administrators in the entire ecosystem. If we can provide that ecosystem, we can provide the Lightning platform with integrations to Hyperledger, and then it's more valuable for the entire ecosystem.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? We have a large crowd, so we might phone. Everybody has a question.
Great. On your Ethereum implementation, you said when you create an account.
Yes.
So where's the private key getting stored in that case?
I don't really want to say, but
Anyone's going to use it and ask that question.
I'll talk to you. I can talk to you after about it. Yeah. I mean, it's similar to the way that Coinbase is a Bitcoin hosted wallet. We're an Ethereum hosted wallet.
All right, so you're storing it somehow. Okay. All right, thanks.
Questions? Back here?
I have a question. So the first demo with smart contracts, you mentioned you're creating an interface dynamically.
Yes.
Are you actually creating like Apex code?
No, so what we do is we just take the JSON from the library, and then that's used in a Visualforce page. And based on the JSON, it constructs the Visualforce page.
So it's really, it's dynamic. I'm trying to think, so like, are you actually writing Visualforce, or is it just like a wrapper Visualforce page that can render anything?
It's a wrapper based on the contract, and it's Angular with the Lightning Design System on top of it.
Thank you.
And we could basically pull up if you enter in the contract address to it, it will pull up the interface. So based on whatever contract you enter in, there's like a, we're gonna probably change this up a little bit too, but based on the contract you enter in, it'll pull up the state. So this is the existing SF meetup token contract. If we pull up the contract address for that, for this contract, it'll pull up, here's the latest, or here's the state for this contract. So it's just a way that we can, you don't have to custom code the interface every time, and you can call the contract from it after. But we're probably going to change this soon to maybe be just like one box, and then like what type of function, and then making the button change based on that. Because right now there's a lot of different functions that you could call for the contract.
Just quick one, where's your Hyperledger running?
So
Or do you have it hosted, or does it matter?
Yeah, so we have it on AWS. So we run the Hyperledger nodes on AWS in Docker containers, and we use Kubernetes as well. So Docker is basically AWS. Yeah.
Same question for Ethereum. Are you using Infura or are you using?
No, we run our own nodes as well. So AWS as well. And we're looking at using the templates. So the AWS just came out with those templates. We weren't doing that from before. We were just running it in like EC2 instances and just spinning up everything. But we're looking at how we can use the CloudFormation templates and call those APIs from Salesforce. So when someone downloads the package, it spins up, essentially like a net new template for them. Right now, it's essentially we have a process that we have to go through to spin it up. But yeah.
Given IBM's position with Hyperledger, is there any particular reason you went AWS instead of IBM Cloud?
We can integrate with IBM blockchain too.
I understand. I'm just asking your.
Yeah, yeah. I think last year we worked with the IBM blockchain team, and like we're using a lot of the technology they've built. Like Fabric and Composer both came out of those teams, and I think we could port it to IBM blockchain. A lot of the times when we go into that's one of the first things we get asked is, can you guys work with IBM blockchain? Just make an integration to that. So we do that too, or we run the nodes. Kind of like I like spinning up the nodes too. So I don't know. I like doing it. Yeah.
Any questions? No? One more.
Maybe I didn't really understand, but I just don't see the point of having, like, for Ethereum, for example, having this UI that can have all the data, because we can have this directly from Parity, for example, and have the same IDE, and we can, or directly with Etherscan or this kind of tools like that.
Right. It's very similar to Parity. It's like Parity, except you don't have to download the entire node to your machine, and
yeah,
it's
even like you can go to Etherscan for that. Or
to
even
which
Parity now it's just like a few megabytes with like nodes. It's really.
I think
easy.
the other thing is, and it's kind of like I wouldn't say our secret sauce, but being built on Salesforce, doing things like lookups to once you create a token, you can do like a lookup to an account or a contact, and just having the enterprise platform that is Salesforce. That's what we see as like this is very similar to Parity, but having it on top of Salesforce as an application layer, there's things that we can do like custom protected settings we're using for a lot of different things, and I just think being on top of Salesforce has also gotten us into companies that's a big check mark for them. If they're on Salesforce and they're exploring this technology, then that helps us answer a lot of their questions up front that they have.
So
I think one of the things is that
I think if I didn't really like using Truffle, and I'd much rather use Salesforce declaratively than use Truffle at the command line to like compile the contracts and use Vim. And so I think that we at the beginning were using all of those tools, Vim and Remix and Infura, and we were saying that we could build, kind of package all of that and put it on Salesforce. That's the idea.
I think the point that we're trying to get at is what we've been going at the entire time, which is building up the layer of abstraction. Do you really want to write the assembler for your code, or would you like to write in a natural language? Again, building that layer of abstraction allows us to work closer to natural thought.
Sure, but in the end you still work in Solidity and have to deploy your smart contract in Solidity. That's the real application. No?
You still have to write smart contracts, or you have someone write the contract, you import it in. I would say though, writing it in this type of interface or like a remix, everyone's doing that. Not many people are writing at the command line their contracts. They're writing them in something or importing like Open Zeppelin. We can import Open Zeppelin libraries and use those as well. And over time, I think, you know, as remix gets better and we're looking at, okay, what should we add from remix? We can add it in.
Any more questions?
What are the price points? Like, do you have a developer?
Yeah, I think, so for the Hyperledger, it's more of like the, like a enterprise engagement type play. But for Ethereum, develop this SDK, we'll say is like free till Dreamforce or some, we want as many people to use this as possible. So if this will be free if you guys want to start using this, absolutely it's free. You can start building on it. Yeah.
All right, well, we have the room for another 15, 20 minutes. We can all hang out and catch up. So thanks a lot for coming out.
Thank you guys.